Life Check Yourself with Miles Katz. Safety is the new sexy. What makes a man stay and evolve? Ladies and my random men that are listening to Life Check Yourself, welcome. Today's episode is probably something that you are going to love listening to. If you have been curious about the field of legal psychedelics, we're talking the cutting edge of healing work, then you are going to love this conversation. I have Miles Katz here today to discuss this with us. He is a pioneer in this field. He blends his personal experience with professional innovation with a passion for advancing mental health. He's the founder and executive director of Confluence Retreats. And in that, he leads immersive multi-day psilocybin retreats in Oregon's Cascade. How do you say it, Miles? Siskiyou?
Cascade Siskiyou National Monument.
Cascade Siskiyou. I probably went there when I did my whole Oregon coast adventure. And so he does these Confluence retreats, and they're legal, and they're structured, and they're profoundly transformative, and they're tailored for individuals who are interested in personal growth. They want to have emotional breakthroughs and spiritual development in a safe and nurturing environment. He also co-founded the Synthesis Institute, which is one of the world's first legal psilocybin service models. He oversaw 1,000 client experiences. He trained more than 250 facilitators. And that really cemented his reputation as a leading voice in this industry. He also has played a significant role in shaping Oregon's legalization of psilocybin. He's been on advisory committees. All that to say, he's a smart cookie and he knows his shit. And now he's going to share it with us. So I'm super excited. So I'm always curious when I have conversations like this with people, like, obviously there was some personal experience that you had, or a frustration or a moment where you were like, this is maybe something I want to pursue. Because you also, I saw in your bio, which I didn't say, have been in the startup industry and just doing like bro financing, it sounds like, and all of those. Yeah. You're a finance bro. So what happened? How did you get here?
Oh my God. I hope people don't call me a finance bro, but I think I identify with my former self.
Your former self.
Yeah, I think unlike a lot of people that work in this field, I was pretty late to the game. I drank alcohol pretty heavily as a late teenager into my 20s, just barely touched cannabis in my early 20s, but I didn't have my first real psychedelic experiences till my late 20s. And so I say that I stumbled into it. I was at the time working with a startup in rural Kenya. I'd lived there for a few years. It was like everything that I had dreamed of coming out of undergraduate as like a social entrepreneur. I'm going to change the world, do business in poor regions of Africa. And without having the awareness or the language around it, I had everything on the surface that I think I wanted. I was like, this company I was with was like featured in international news because it was sexy, because it helped farmers and grew sustainable crops. And there was a part of me that was like really empty inside, and I was like just feeling really lost and stranded. And that very slowly led me to start experimenting with drugs in my late 20s. And it was very far from intentional or therapeutic or thoughtful.
Right.
And
it was an escape. Were you like escaping, or were you actually like curious to see what you could see that was beyond what your consciousness was?
I think probably a combination of both. There was like a part of my awareness that was like, I had a curiosity about psychedelics. I remember being young and like thinking really curious things about mushrooms and LSD. And then there was another part of me that was just like so desperate for any meaning, or without language, healing. Like I didn't have these words at the time, but I look back at my pre-psychedelic self and I was severely depressed and addicted to alcohol and just numbing myself, and never close to being diagnosed with either of those things, because I was, from the outside, a very high performing individual,
right? Running
my own business, being interviewed for magazines, whatever. And my first real psychedelic experience was with LSD. Really, as they say in our community, like lifted the veil, or, kind of flipped me. And those feelings of depression, like I just had this like complete lightness, this tingling sensation was in my head and my shoulders. And I really had no interest in alcohol at all. This experience took place at a regional version of Africa Burn. Sorry, it's called Africa Burn. It's a regional Burning Man that happens in South Africa.
Oh, nice.
And so very far from like a guided, facilitated anything, but still very powerful. And really, when I first had this experience, it was so transformative that I started researching if I melted my brain. Like, that's how far away I was from understanding anything. And I read everything I could for about 6 months before I decided it was time to try it again. And by that point, the majority of like the initial afterglow had worn off, but I'd already like completely rewritten my relationship to alcohol, which had a ton of benefits, like just like in itself. And I started setting up, like, very far from what I do now professionally, but I started setting up like really safe spaces for me and friends to experiment with psychedelics in Kenya, these beautiful cabins on mountainsides in the forests. And, you know, it was not a therapeutically designed program because I didn't have the knowledge or education at the time, but it was also very far away from like a show up and take whatever drugs you want. It was like, we all get together. There was a sober guide. I felt really responsible. I was like introducing a lot of people to this. And my friends called me drug dad because of how thoughtful and was. And so that's kind of how I got started. And couple years later, I'd organized probably a dozen of these like retreats in Kenya with LSD. And I decided that I needed to like find a way to work in this field professionally. And I got connected to two other guys, similar at the time. We were all early 30s. And that's the psychedelic retreat business in Amsterdam. We all co-founded that, raised venture capital and went about this in a very, I'd say like a less evolved, mature way. There's a lot of like things I learned about that experience of mixing capitalism and psychedelics, and it's really part of the failure of that. Yeah, and part of that is what led me here, which is we're a really small nonprofit doing one program a month for 8 people, really high quality work, but not trying to be the fastest, best, most anything, and just keeping it small and simple, because that's like really where these experiences belong.
I love this. So I never watched one episode of Severance except the finale of season 2. So if you haven't watched that yet, spoiler alert. But when you were talking, I was thinking about like the objective behind that, right? Like the guy's like has a trauma. He doesn't want to think about it, right? So he's like, let me just compartmentalize so I don't have to deal with my shit, basically. And I think that this is such a cultural phenomenon because the need to people have of their pain that they would even imagine this, and so many people would follow it and resonate and not think it's ridiculous, is kind of what you're talking about. So talk to me about how you are perceiving the use of these psychedelics in the treatment of mental health. What have you noticed? What's the stats? How is it working, and who is it for?
Yeah, happily share. I'll probably just handpick a handful of like the most prominent, topics, because there's been a pretty big emergence of research into psilocybin and other psychedelics in the last decade or so. It's the main ones that jump out is like, and in some ways I contextualize the impact that this can have on people's mental health, is that these clinical trials for psilocybin and depression, anxiety, end of life, kind of like existential dread, they're taking people who are, by clinical standards, treatment resistant. So that means they've tried a number of treatments over a number of years and they still have depression. And what they're showing is that a single dose of psilocybin in a controlled setting with a bit of support before and after leads people to no longer have symptoms of depression for like 6 months or so. And it's about 60 to 80% of people in these studies that have those outcomes. And so the FDA, this is going back to 2018, designated psilocybin as a breakthrough therapy, which means it created a path to fast track the approval as a prescribable medication.
Right.
That I don't actually, haven't heard too much about that in the last couple of years. But here in Oregon, the state took a different approach. Instead of waiting for the federal government to go through the clinical trial process and approve it and make it prescribable by doctors, an individual who I'm friends with named Tom Deckert created a ballot petition and got it on the election in 2020 at the state ballot. And the state approved essentially an adult use facilitated model for psilocybin. So here in Oregon, the vast majority of people are coming to treat things like depression or addiction or anxiety, but there's nothing in the state law that says it has to be. It's inherently not a medical program here in Oregon, and similar in Colorado, which is opening up this year as well for similar services. So I appreciate that, because just like I shared in my story, the classification of diagnosis is a really limited viewpoint into someone's well-being. I think, and I look at myself in hindsight as someone who very easily could have been diagnosed with these things, but wasn't ever close to being diagnosed. And so I like the approach that the Oregon and Colorado have gone, because it doesn't limit it to being accessible by a doctor prescribing you a medication for a condition that happens to be covered by, hopefully covered by insurance one day. It really opens the door to a much wider use of psychedelics, which is sometimes the language I use for this is like my own journey is like, wasn't necessarily from diagnosed to no longer diagnosed, right? Or like diagnosis treatment. It's more in the what I call functioning to flourishing paradigm, where I was like, I wasn't diagnosed, but I also wasn't doing very well, and I used psychedelics alongside other tools like therapy and more spiritual or somatic based approaches, and now live a life that I can call flourishing. I have a family, everyone's healthy and happy. We have meaning and purpose in our work in life, and I have meaningful community. Like, doesn't mean shit's not hard sometimes. It just means that I'm more often connected to this like higher purpose to this existence. And I think psychedelics can be an equally powerful tool to go down that road as they can be also for the treatment of diagnosis like depression or addiction, which we see in the clinical research.
So let me ask you a question, because and I've never done that, right? I'm like, I've never experienced it. So I only have like anecdotal references, right?
Great.
But my husband has dealt with alcoholism off and on, but like very high functioning for years. And so this was like, 2014, 15, 16, a while back. He was like, I'm going to go do this facilitated ayahuasca thing. And that will like solve all my problems. And I was like, okay, fine. I was actually in Africa on a trip, mission trip. And he came back and he did that experience. And needless to say, he relapsed until he actually went to AA and started like working a program and kind of taking it seriously. But I think that what I want you to talk about, because I think this is the thing that I want people to really think about, is that if people go in there and they're like, this will solve all my problems, which is what they do for anything, like let me pay this money and do this experience, or let me hire this person, or let me, we want to find a thing that will solve all our pain. So can you just talk about the process of it and under what circumstances it actually is a part of a long, I would assume like a longer journey into your evolution?
I love this question, and that you shared your husband's experience with ayahuasca, because I do think psychedelics are inherently incredibly powerful and can be. And part of what we deal with as facilitators is people coming in with these massive expectations, and in these experiences, expectations can get in the way of what the best practice is, which is actually surrendering into the journey and letting it take you wherever it wants to take you. And, people that work with psychedelics often say you get what you need, not what you want. And so, on a more practical level, I think one way to look at this, there's kind of two ways we look at psychedelics being really effective. One is the experiences themselves. So I'd say like, if you are feeling really safe and prepared and comfortable to go into these high dose experiences, and explore the depths of your subconscious, they often take place with eye mask on and wearing headphones to listen to guided music as a way to just encapsulate you just inside your subconscious mind. And it is very likely, if you're feeling ready and safe, that you will get something really deeply meaningful out of this experience. I'm just thinking about recent clients we've had in groups, people connecting to dead relatives, people going back to childhood experiences and processing traumatic experiences in new ways that allows them to be accepting and forgiving rather than angry at their parents, for example.
Yeah.
So there are these ways in which the experience itself can really lead to some very direct insights and perspectives. And that's awesome and really meaningful. And the other way that psychedelics are scientifically being seen to have really significant impacts on a wide range of different mental health issues is what they're calling neuroplasticity that occurs after these experiences. So your brain, they've shown in brain imaging that your brain is actually more flexible after these experiences. And so there's some interesting research from Johns Hopkins that says that they can't tell any difference in long-term therapeutic benefit of doses between 20 and 30 milligrams of psilocybin, which is a pretty big jump. It's 30%, right? And then they also have some research that says that above doses of 30 milligrams, you start to see a slight increase in what we're calling challenging experiences, which for the sake of simplicity and time is just like a more evolved word of bad trips.
Yeah.
But in a way where it's like, it still has value, even if it's challenging. So like you kind of like step back from the data a little bit and you're like, okay, it doesn't matter if I take this dose, or if the trip is pleasant or unpleasant. Like the science says I have the same long-term potential for therapeutic benefit. And that's really like how they're attributing the neuroplasticity. A really simple metaphor I like to share on this is you can imagine that like in your brain, you've been like skiing down a mountain, you've been going down the same paths your whole life. A lot of people will say they feel stuck. I've even listened to some pretty interesting theories of trauma and healing where like we're just developing these subconscious patterns as our children and navigating the world, and they're cementing, and then we're like building on top of them. So just these layers of stuckness and behaviors and thinking, and and depression is being stuck in the past, and anxiety is being stuck on the future, and PTSD is stuck on specific events. And there's this way that a high dose psychedelic experience can be like a fresh layer of powder on the mountain. And so the metaphor is, doing one of these journeys, particularly if it's facilitated and you feel safe and it can feel like you're at the top of the mountain. And that's where you hear people who take psychedelics feel the connectedness and the oneness and, sometimes awe and gratitude. And like, this is kind of what I assume was missing in your husband's ayahuasca journey, only from what I know about what's going on in ayahuasca globally. But, the way we use it is like, you still have to ski down the mountain.
Right.
And so the invitation is for you to take that fresh powder and really thoughtfully start to ski down a different path. I tell people that if they just go home from this, no matter how mystical or mind-blowing their psychedelic trip is, if they just go home and do the same stuff in 3 to 6 months, you're going to eventually feel the same way as you used to feel. And that's what the clinical data shows too. Because in the clinical data, they don't want to intervene after the journey. They want to just study the substance. Yeah,
they just want to see if you're magically healed.
Totally. That's our modern medical model. So the invitation and how we support people is like help you develop what is that new ski path. And for some people it's lifestyle changes, for some people it's therapy or meditation, for some people it's relationships that need to change. And so it's really personal for each person, and you eventually develop new paths and new ruts. And my hope for working with everyone is that those new ruts you develop are just at least 2 or 3 stages better than the previous ones that you were.
I always say new level, new devil, right? Like, because you overcome this thing and then you want a bigger life, right? And you're like, oh, now I have a family. Now I have a family and a career. Now I have a family, career, and kids, right? And you're like, big life, big challenges. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you another question.
Can I add one more small thing?
Please do.
I don't want to like knock ayahuasca. I've had some really powerful experiences. I think I just want to contextualize that, because ayahuasca is essentially like a religious tradition from Central American tribes. I haven't really seen almost anyone doing it with the thoughtfulness around preparation and integration support that the Western psychedelic therapy model of research in psilocybin here in Oregon is using. So I'll just name theirs. Like, it's not that it's inherently less effective than psilocybin. It's just generally the way people are using ayahuasca is like, drink the ayahuasca, go home. We're a lot more involved with our clients, and it's just because ayahuasca comes from a place where you don't need that prep and integration, because it's part of those communities where, like, here in our communities, it's so foreign that people need a lot more hand holding, I think.
Okay. Now I have some more questions for you and this is a perfect segue. So when you think about the different kind of psychedelic healing treatments, my daughter lives in Santa Monica. You walk down the street and there's like a ketamine clinic, right? And there's there's that going on. There is the psilocybin. There's DMT. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
DMT, right? Okay. So, and then I hear, so again, anecdotal, but I have a really dear friend who was like, not having it. And then he did this ketamine experience with his girlfriend, facilitated. And then he was like, that was amazing. I got so much. And so now he's sort of like, well, I don't really feel like I can get those insights without doing that. So now and again, I don't know anything about any of this, but now he's like going fairly regularly. And then the last time he did it, he had like a bad experience. Right. So can you just talk to me, educate us, about like, what are the differences between all of these things? And then how do you know what would be best for you, for your chronic problem?
Yeah. I'm just checking how I answer that question.
I know that's like a big question.
Yeah. I'll start like my personal passion. I've done most psychedelics, many of times. I choose to operate in the legal regulated model because I think that is a really important place for this industry to focus on. Right. Continue to evolve. So, because then that's just going to inform this answer, because I could talk about illegal psychedelics for a very long time. That's
another episode, right?
Yeah. So ketamine is something that is very commonly being branded as psychedelic therapy. It is pharmacologically not a psychedelic. It is a surgical anesthetic that people, when you give someone enough ketamine for surgery, they get dissociate from their body so much that you can do surgery on them and they're okay. People discovered that at lower doses of ketamine, you dissociate not fully from your body, but you're still kind of with your consciousness. And that can have some things that it's kind of mirrors a psychedelic journey of sorts. So you see a lot of these ketamine clinics because it's already a legal medication. When they use it for therapy, it's not FDA approved for therapy, but they use it off label and it's been around since the 50s. So it's really cheap as a product. Like the medication.
Unless you're Matthew Perry. No.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's a whole
other thing. Right. But that's crazy. Right. But it's available. Right. And so that was the whole thing with that. Right.
Yeah. And what you see is like these infusion clinics. So you walk into these ketamine infusion clinics. Generally, they don't have a lot of support before and after. They hook you up to an IV for an hour. You go on a mini journey and you go home. If you look at the clinical data for ketamine, it shows effectiveness for about 2 to 4 weeks compared to like what I shared with psilocybin, 6+ months.
Right.
And that kind of tells you, I think, a lot about how they can be effective as tools. I talk to a good amount of people, and I use ketamine too. Like at home, I find there's a role for it, but it is not nearly as profound or transformational as psilocybin or other psychedelics. And so I talk to a lot of people who do ketamine therapy, and it helps them move the needle a little bit, but it just makes them more curious about other psychedelics. And that's, so I say ketamine is way more accessible because it is legal in every state and can provide short. I've seen really amazing clinical data on ketamine for suicidality, like overnight suicidality being removed. But it's not, I put it in a different category as far as like psychedelics, because it's psilocybin's only legal in a few countries in Central America, Jamaica, Costa Rica, the Netherlands, and Europe, where I used to work. In all those places, it's not regulated at all. So it's kind of in this category of like legal because it's not technically illegal, where Oregon and Colorado now are the only places in the world that have regulated access models. So I have a license from the Oregon Health Authority to be a psilocybin facilitator, to sit with people to consume mushrooms that were grown by a licensed grower at a licensed facility. And so that's really new. Oregon's been open for a couple of years. Colorado is literally just opening its first centers sometime in the next couple of months. And I would say that like this is probably, there's a handful of reasons that psilocybin is, I think, the most researched psychedelic. Partially that it's a natural, that makes people feel safer about it.
Yep.
Compared to something like LSD, the experience lasts for about 6 hours, which is a long time, but not as long as LSD, which could be like 10 hours. So there's like a real practical component of like how to put this into society. You can't have people sitting with you for 10 to 12 hours all the time.
And is MDMA in the LSD category, or is it closer to the psilocybin category?
MDMA is...
Or is that just totally different?
Yeah, it's a different, it also isn't technically a psychedelic, although I'd say it's way more psychedelic than ketamine. And it has a ton of research behind it, unlike others. So they've done a lot of research for MDMA for PTSD.
Okay.
And they've shown that this is good to talk about because it's getting a lot of attention too. They've shown that it reduces the part of your brain that processes fear and increases the part of your brain that processes empathy. And that's like our main understanding and theory of why it's helpful, particularly for veterans that they're doing research with, to go back to their traumatic memories without the fear, with a lot of empathy and compassion, and almost like rewrite their experiences on those traumatic memories. So right now, the MDMA is not legal anywhere. The FDA made a pretty surprising decision last year after many decades of clinical research to not approve the application. So there's a little bit of a uncertainty on what the path forward will be. It'll be another series of clinical trials before that's approved. So I look at the landscape, and then for ayahuasca, you'll find some places in the US where people are doing it under religious exemption. There are a small number of actual ayahuasca churches that actually got that religious exemption. But from what I've witnessed, a lot of them just say they have religious protection without the actual papers from their local municipality. Okay. And then a lot of people go to Central and South America for ayahuasca. And so I look at that whole landscape, and I look at what's far from perfect, but still legal and regulated here in Oregon and Colorado. And I think it's the best access model we're going to get for a while. Yeah.
Okay. So like before you talk about psilocybin more specifically, because I just felt like it was important for listeners to understand, but because all these things are just being thrown around and talked about. And I think that if you're not aware of it, one thinks they're all the same ish, right? Okay. So let's go back to the other question. So for the purpose of, so if someone's listening and they're like, okay, for me, legal and regulated is super, super important. Yeah. Like I don't want to go to South America. I don't want to go to some random ranch in the desert in Arizona and do some facilitated trip. What are the things that they can get the most help with? Like, who is the ideal candidate to come to a facility like yours or the one that will be opening in the state of Colorado?
I'm just pausing because that's also could be a long answer. I think
that's okay. We have plenty of time.
Yeah, I think the simplest answer that's coming to mind is I think what maybe is also misconstrued the way people talk about it and how it's not a silver bullet. And it's like, as I kind of shared with the metaphor of skiing down the mountain, like to get the most out of it, it is a really participatory experience. And so I think someone who is dedicated to their healing journey and willing to put in the work, I tell people all the time, like mushrooms won't change your life. They hopefully will give you a lot of insights and perspective, and then they'll give you this neuroplasticity, which will help you make those decisions and changes easier, but you still have to do it. Like you still have to be involved and put in the work. And, and so I think with that in mind, like it could be like, I'm just thinking about the people coming on our retreat next week, like people who have been identified and struggling with depression for a long time, or people who are just spiritually curious and been, doing therapy maybe, or, but never like really like tried psychedelics and just been hearing so much that, might be something that they're ready for. I think that's my personal view, is like, as long as people feel like a sense of safety and readiness inside them and work with someone they really trust, like it doesn't have to be legal and regulated, but I think for most people that does create a lot of safety and comfort. I think that, a lot of different outcomes can transform in these sessions, and we're just there to hold whatever comes up for someone, whether it's the dark, scary face your demons journey or the giggle for 6 hours because you have trouble connecting with joy and playfulness in your life journey.
Interesting. Yeah. So what advice then would you give to those people who are considering this retreat? Like how does someone best prepare to make the most of that?
Yeah, I generally think that therapy is helpful. I know therapy doesn't move the needle for a lot of people, but I think having the scaffolding of therapy as a framework to understand your patterns and behaviors before and after this experience can be really useful. I think our retreats provide the most support out of what I see happening in Oregon and a lot of other places around the world at the moment. But even that said, like these experiences will continue to give you insights and perspective for weeks and months after the programs. And so I think like a long-term weekly or bi-weekly therapist is just a really nice touch point to kind of keep unpacking and keep unfolding things that come up. Not a requirement, but I think people would get more generally out of it with that. I tell people like all the time, like do your homework and like really, really feel like you can trust the people you're connecting with. Like for our programs, like you can't click a button on the website and sign up. Like you have to go through an hour-long interview process, and that's twofold. One is to build trust and rapport with someone, and two is like so we can make sure they're a good candidate for the group, because in small group dynamics, like one X personality might just like ruin it for everyone, and we take it really seriously, like who should be coming into this group and sharing this experience together. And so I think that feeling of trust and safety is really important with whoever you provide to work with. And as far as like different psychedelics and different paths, I truly don't have a judgment against any of them. I use all of them from time to time. I do think psilocybin in this regulated way is a really, really powerful and usually a really good place to start. And I tell clients all the time, like, I don't think of our retreats as like the best or the only way to do psychedelics. I think they're a really good way for people who are new to step in and get a lot of support. And then I get thrilled afterwards when clients are asking me like, where can I go try ayahuasca? Or I want to try microdosing at home. And like, we don't provide those services, but I'm like, that's kind of the path of implementing and including psychedelics in your life. And, we want each journey to be as powerful as possible. And there's always more layers of the onion to peel back and more healing to do.
And so I know the way you do it, you have like a one-off kind of a thing. And then you have like a regular therapy session. And then you have these 3 and 5 day retreats. Yeah. How are those different? What makes someone sign up for like 3 days or 5 days or whatever it is?
Yeah. So the heart and soul of our small nonprofit that runs these programs is our 5-day program that has a medium dose and then a high dose experience in the 5 days. And then there are people from time to time, particularly if there's like really active traumas related to being around other people, where you just like might just know you'll never feel safe being in a group of people, no matter how well structured it is.
Right.
There are people who are better suited for individual work, or just sometimes people just like know themselves really well and they're like, yep, I just want to do this one-on-one. And so I can share that the primary, I'd say like probably 99% of the way people are coming to Oregon to do this.
Yeah.
And the latest numbers I've been told is that over 10,000 people have come to Oregon for this, is in these like one-on-one sessions. So people will fly in, get a motel room, overwhelmingly from out of state right now.
Right.
Get a motel room, Uber to their session, do a very high dose of psilocybin, Uber back to their motel room by themselves, and then fly out the next day. And they'll have a little bit of support before and after on Zoom. And I do work with people that way. I don't want to take away from it. People have really meaningful experiences, but I really do believe it's this, and I tell clients this, like, I think it's a really suboptimal way to go about this experience. I think the more you can engage in the process and disconnect from your everyday life and be in a beautiful natural setting and share meals with people you're going on journeys with, like, the more your nervous system can ease and relax and be ready to go deeper and deeper. And this is why we really focus on the 5-day programs, is that we see how people really continue to unravel deeper and deeper inside of them, their awareness and their consciousness and their trauma patterns, like each day of the program. And starting with a medium dose that's intentionally like not to blast anyone to psychedelic outer space.
Right. Right.
Just to give people a feeling of what it'll be like, and things will come up, but like hopefully not, like people are not so terrified after that they don't want to do it again, which has never happened. They're just like learning more about themselves, easing all the, I'd say, like surface level anxieties and fears they have for the first time. What's it going to be like? What's the room going to feel like? What if I make too much noise? Is that going to be okay? Like just all the ways your mind will run wild. And then we have that experience, and we have a full day to help you integrate what came up there. And then you get to choose how much higher of a dose you want to go in for the second journey. And what I witness and what I believe is that people going into that second journey are so much more ready because they've had that first journey experience. And, a lot of people have huge expectations of what they want to get out of this because they've been suffering for so long.
Yeah.
And I think those 2 journeys helps just distill that to be more grounded and rooted. And, you don't have to like have all your hopes in this one session with the mushrooms. You can like spread it out over the course of the retreat. So, so that's kind of like the basic premise. I think I really do practice like trusting that clients know what's best for them. So we'll make recommendations. And for the most part, as I said, it's usually for the longer program, but it's more expensive. We know that. It's sometimes the dates don't work for people. Sometimes people just know they're better. So I'm not trying to prescribe anything to anyone.
Right. It's like people know what it is they can do and what they need and all of those sorts of things. So last sort of question is, so when people ask you, and I'm sure this happens all the time, but like, what is the long-term effect? I mean, obviously you've done lots of different things. You've researched the crap out of it. But when someone comes, I'm sure people call and they're like, oh, because you had said even you wanted to make sure you didn't melt your brain. How can you address people's concerns about this particular strategy to really further your healing?
Yeah, I think what's often most surprising to people is how safe psychedelics are. There's some interesting research by a guy named David Nutt out of the UK. This is going back to the early 2000s, where he compares the harm to self and harm to society of all different psychoactive drugs, including caffeine and alcohol. And I think there's like 20 substances on the list, and far on the right, on the extreme, is like alcohol and heroin. And then way down at the other end of the spectrum, I think mushrooms are like the lowest or one of the lowest. And so it's kind of just rewriting a lot of false information that we've been fed since the war on drugs started. And a lot of us grew up with DARE in schools and Nancy Reagan commercial where they crack the egg in the frying pan.
Yeah, this is your brain on drugs. I grew up during that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And the deeper you look into this, the more you learn. Like there's people from those administrations that have come out and said, like, we used the war on drugs to isolate our political oppositions. And like the leaders of the Black Panthers and the psychedelic movements were actually arrested for small amounts of cannabis possession. And so the more you look into this, the more you realize that most of what everyone has in their mind about this is not true. And then there's just some really other interesting things, like how I kind of talked a little bit about neuroplasticity, but they've been showing how psychedelics have the potential to help regrow brain neurons. They call it neurogenesis, which is something that like really doesn't happen outside of childhood, and how they're actually anti-addictive because Well, one, generally, these experiences are so emotionally involved that people generally don't want to do them again. But even outside of that,
right? It's you're like, that was a lot. I think I need a break.
Yeah, totally. And even outside of that, they don't actually work. Like, you can't keep taking them every day because they will stop having an effect very fast. And so they're kind of like anti-addictive in nature. And so there's just like all these things about drugs generally and also psychedelics that are largely misinformation. And so there's some really great books and resources, documentaries. How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan is probably the best book. He was just interviewed by Oprah about psychedelics recently. So that's pretty interesting about mainstreaming this topic. And then Netflix has documentaries like Fantastic Fungi and How to Change Your Mind. That book was made into a documentary series on Netflix. So there's a bunch of great places to get good information these days.
Oh my gosh, I love this topic. I think it's so, so important. And I just am so grateful that you showed up so we could have this conversation for sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So ladies and rando gents, there is a link to the Confluence retreats. Of course, you can also follow Miles on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. All those links will be below. Is there any other last piece of advice that you would give to a listener around this topic, since you're so knowledgeable about it?
I think the thing coming to mind is just to be curious and follow your curiosity at your own pace with your own caution. It's really easy in this world of psychedelics to get into wormholes of really obscure topics of what people say about this medicine or that medicine. And I just really trust people's intuition, and there are safe ways to do it. And it's really important that you feel safe and whatever guides you down that process. So yeah, be curious.
That's amazing. I love that. You have to trust yourself enough to make that decision, right? And so, finding resources like Miles that are actually knowledgeable and are really aligned with the outcome that you want is super, super important. We'll have a lot of people reach out to you. Ladies, thank you for listening. Once again, so many moments, right, that Miles shared, information, truth-telling. I'm all about like, what are the real facts and what's the story you have going on in your head about something. And so hopefully this episode really helped you get some clarity about what is and is not right for you, and to underscore that in whatever it is you're doing, there is no magic bullet, right? And that this is a part of your journey and your healing to be more of who you are in the world. So remember, in all ways and always, whatever you do, life check yourself. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.
Hey, thanks for tuning in today. Listen, if you're feeling stuck, I want you to know you're not alone, and you don't have to settle for it. I've created a free quiz to help you pinpoint what's draining your energy and exactly how you can fix it. So head over to decodeyourdestinyquiz.com and take the 60-second quiz right now. That's decodeyourdestinyquiz.com. And if you're ready to dive deeper, you can book a free no-obligation consultation at marnibatista.com/private coaching. That's Marni, M-A-R-N-I, Batista, B-A-T-T-I-S, as in Sam, T-A.com/private coaching, all one word. Let's take the first step to creating a life you love on your terms. I'm Marni, and I'll see you next time.